So before I get carried away with other facets of it, we'll skip to the in conclusion. I'll start doing that. So from Mexico to Chicago is a corridor. Passes through Texas, Memphis, Chicago cartel human trafficking, Les Wexner, Jeffrey Epstein, Hillary Clinton, Sarah Silverman, AOC, Bernie Sanders, Netanyahu. And so necessarily Wexner, Epstein, harvest, launder, convert, Clintons stabilize institutional law enforcement and intelligence apparatus and connected to Epstein directly in real estate handling. Epstein doesn't have private wealthy funds. Wexner provides them. He's not a privately wealthy individual, naturalistically, and both are Mossad equals Netanyahu. And so Octavia Cortez is planning on running for president. I assert that she isn't. She isn't going to do that. Why? Because she's part of a paradox state. So we'll have an actual candidate, what might be Trump again, like World War II. Whoopsie daisy. So you see in the basic, controlling the opposition, obtuse from the narrative you control endogenously, is a basic intelligence complex ideation. Correct? Yeah. That's sort of like the most basic thing, controlling the narrative by proactively assuming the counterpoint. And subsequently, there is no actual counterpoint that exists obtuse from your control of narrative vector continuum. Yes, that's very basic intelligence operations and optic of medias and geopolitics. So, use my circadian code interlock that has a surgical to what? So, I tethered the 20-day Africano to Fulton County and other city sewage dump cycle, uptick in viral cytokine load in the sewage processing. And every 3 to 4 days, there's 3 different cities, Hispanic occupy, where there's a massive uptick in water consumption because they're having a cytokine storm issue, circadian clock. And every 12 hours, Asiatic, circadian, there's a server load balancing between Israel and Asiatic, necessarily every 12 hours surgically. And Semitic necessarily operating at the genetic circadian clock level at the 1 millisecond in time frequency. So we don't have an exact marker necessarily unless see the base 7 long form history established to the exact nanosecond of temporal time. I did the 23rd as the tether. So in the interdomain of when all these clocks line up, the 3, that one at that base 7 intersect is imposed. And we have to the nanosecond a morphogenetic circadian interlock at the genetic layer. Well, if you just casually consult Google, it'll say, all humans, same thing. There's no difference, but we're all diversity, right? Wait, hold on. We're doing data science genetic inspection. And it goes, oh, you're a scientist, not an idiot. Okay, here we go. So there's any number of genes, see this still attached, that are specificity mutations interdomain of 4 genetics that aren't present in all other genetics. And they have a specific circadian interlocking frequency and overlap. And when you scan the overlapping circadian, what do you know? Every time they all overlap, there's preposterous macro events coupled to that overlapping period. Wouldn't you know? So it's 20-day Africano attached to the sewage dump. You know, you see my alchemist jokes now for what they are, right? It's directly transmutation of shit into gold. Anyways, so every 3.4 days, Hispanic overpopulation cities have a massive uptick in water consumption, right? And every 12 hours, Asiatic server load balancing to Semitic, giving you a direct interlock couple. So Israeli server load, Asiatic server load. Every 12 hours, glitch, and then you look for the overlap, and that gives you to the millisecond attached to the base 7 for all 4. And then with this tether, you back roll the clock. And it's not a wheel where they all intersect, because it's different times. So it's a rolling wheel that sometimes intersects, and sometimes intersects, and sometimes intersects. And at those intersect moments, you see preposterous 4-way handshake in optic or event at the macro level of geopolitics and market fluctuation, journalistically. So, there's the E180, 180i, Asiatic, the other, and G6PD. It's generally the macro interlocking. See this still. And so populist physics, science, maths tell us a lot of overhead and nonsense about any number of things. The inability to inspect variance in a diversity culture paradigm is very strange. So that's a paradox, yes? I agree with you. So if we're all different, why can't we inspect how we're different, if that's actually the case? Yeah? Exactly. So there you see not wanting to inspect because you actually see variance. So that's a mind control motion. And the variance of genetic directly speaks to the macro statistical paradigm in variance, at crime, at population density seeding, in voice cadence topology, in general motion within a given space, and within a macro space. All the genetic speaking to that. And necessarily when you see interlocking of the 4 and these genetic mutations and deletion clusters that don't exist in any other genetics, and then you see, after scanning, say, legal filings since 1977 to now, all behavior paradigm macro statistics, a given space of a basketball court where cross-domain of teams is hybridly circuited, autonomous from the other genetics present, Africano. So taking into account all of these scannings, what do you see? An autonomous circuited interlock of those 4 genetics, obtuse from all other genetics, which are only 10% of the world. So that's very important. The 10% in basic statistical inspection is a minority group. Yes? And these 4 genetics seem to be circuitedly interlocked and autonomous in mutation and affinity of genetic expression in this block and this circadian way. 90% of the Earth's population and the majority demographic. So the scam locally is to what? Condition as minority while being the majority internationally. Thus, gain of function rights access at the coffers of punitive legal and other rights access, such as having 10 times a murder rate, but enjoying the same rights and privileges as other genetics. Which is silly, right? So, yeah, very basically, because we can backscan geopolitic for surgical interlocking to the circadian clock and find, in just the first scan, 10 surgical interlocking of AOC to Netanyahu, frequency of does a motion and then she does a motion within a given space of time. So that's a scripted on-roll. We're not like to appease either one because they're both mob so far as federal law enforcement and intelligence is concerned. Controlling the conversation about mass death events such as COVID or Gaza or any number of other things. And so, the scam for her is, I'm going to run as the opposition leader to the paradigm, what she's part of industriously, at a genetic level, at a time frequency at the inspected level. This is simple code. You can run the circadian clock backtick and inspect surgical interlocking at every intersect of the genetic circadian clock through time since she's been in politics. So what do you see? Sarah Silverman, a proponent of AOC. Sarah Silverman equals Hillary Clinton. Clinton's equals the Epstein files. And that equals Wexner, because Epstein doesn't exist without Wexner. It's not privately wealthy, living on an island like a Bond villain, doing human trafficking to that from probably Chicago. And where do the Chicago tuples come from? Well, not necessarily the high value ones that motion to the island, but mostly on the interday from Mexico. So AOC is Hispanic, yeah? Right next to, in District 14, where Sarah Silverman likes to do her bed pissing musical, because it's a Semitic enclave, the 12th, and I think it's 11 districts. Anyway, so very tactful, very tasteful, and see her comedy for what it is now, addressing Silverman, this sardonic, evil, rub continuity as if comedy. So if you don't have the context relevance for where she's coming from and just consider it jokes, right? Wow. You might giggle every 50 jokes, maybe. So it's not funny either in either context, which is, part of the, gets quit claim properties 1948, 2020, 2008, 1981, Carter crash, all of them. Free properties and then draws loans on them. Free properties, draws loans, does group insider trading with the free cash off the free properties, and here they are. And then going back to 1208 BC, Egypt. So that stone is referring to what? So the Pharaoh was saying, I've immolated all of these entities. And it was, in time where a nomenclature label for something is then used by another group in a different way to describe something else. So maybe you could say that's the case, but I wouldn't. Why? So Pharaoh's addressing these 9 nations and see the decoding as Israel. Semitic genetic, so far as the topology of the ethno-religiosity of that assumption, regardless of the calendar arbitrary starting back before that, don't exist in the historical record actually in populist record of archaeology in Egypt. So it's all a lie. And stolen that name off the wall of the 1208 BC stone. It's like a Munchausen by proxy martyrdom complex imposed with stolen back history and forward conditioned. And you can take Egyptian writing and directly transmute it into Semitic and then Gematria. And then through that, necessarily make a transmutagenic compiler for all languages. So that's useful, and I used it for any number of things. But you see, like AI, only as good as its data set. What would AI do if it landed in, let's say, 295 BC and had its available topology of architecture, languages, and ruins? What would it steal from? Well, it would steal from Egypt and make language, because it's the most high rotating thing. So, see the other talks for why that is. But this, just focusing on the Hebrew language, comes from the walls of Egypt. So does Chinese symbol language. They're both derived from that. And then we go to the Mayan Civ, 3114 BC. Chinese dynastics start at the same exact time and have a surgical interlock at all epochal shifts macro of both civilizations for 5,140 years without ever cross-communicating. And so, going back to temporal, see the other talks for that. Of course, the cartel, Hispanic, equals Wexner, equals Israeli intelligence, and Chinese fentanyl. Chinese fentanyl through Mexico, precursor. What else do you need to look at? Law enforcement. Nothing. Did we just connect all of them? Pretty much. So, see the other talks, and this is just addressing very basically the preposterosity of the prancing pony of paradox state. That's like to, it's very funny. I joked in DMs to any number of people about, for 7 days straight, I'll end on this comment. We had to hear about AOC freezing her eggs. AOC's freezing her eggs. She's freezing her eggs this. She's freezing her eggs that. She's freezing her eggs this. And this and that. And freezing her eggs. And so, in addition to just being a paradox state and imposing a 7 million death print, Wuhan, China, equals Israeli intelligence. So the equation there is 322 CIA Clinton, Wexner, Borla, Epstein, Mossad, Gates, WHO, Fauci, NIH, Wuhan, China. Necessarily motioning directive to the entire complex hyperdimensionally in the way they're connected. It's a non-linear, linear equation, that. So a 7 million death print on purpose. L-cysteine's on the website. You can just scan L-cysteine. Oh, there it is. Not a big deal. So it's intentional, right? And you see load balancing at the apex expression of BTC peak hash rate in China to Rockdale, Texas, equals Abbott, equals Bush, equals Clinton. So an intentional surgical motion of authoritative action to print capital that then is then seeded into this predictably set up, there's no Satoshi Nakamoto cryptocurrency as a capital catcher for that 4.84 trillion dump into specifically 4 banks that are responsible for 100% of millionaires in 2020. So you see the whole complex very simply now. And what is it, 90% of the world? Who cares, right? So see the precursor talks, and I'll necessarily address 8 other planets, Earth-like planets, pinpointed in the last few weeks, kind of casually. There's any number of others, but those ones are important. One of which, Proxima Centauri, of note, and And so always go back to don't panic. Oh my gosh, 90% controlling the conversation doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So an idiot would think controlling medias is controlling weaponry interchangeably, right? The chameleon fool. So they don't control those things that came back in 2022, 2023 that make it able to be talked about in open air in a coffee shop with thumb and butt in one of the murder capitals of the world, right? So there's no continuity of relevance regardless of having a converged MSM in data layer medias impose itself as an absolute power complex when it only controls conversation. So geopolitics actually can go on without consulting that as a confirmation bias of the relevance of their own power dynamic, an ability to motion power obtuse from the perceived power dynamic historically. Yeah? So AOC is not a problem, right? And necessarily forward legal will be imposed to remove the rights access to elected office for these four genetics in question in the United States. As what? There's any number of nations that have industrious sovereign genetic, it's any number of these, specifically the four that are responsible for 100% of diversity lawsuits since 1977, no one else. They have in their nation states protecting 100% the sovereignty of their and forbidding foreign actor from rights access to elected office. It's a commonality accepted legal paradigm in those nation states. Why isn't it here? Exactly. So it will be. And this is just a basic casual logic for why that necessarily is.